Hello, everybody. There are still few seats left in the business class, so come forward.
Welcome, everybody. Tervetuloa. Tervetulemast. I'm very happy to be again having a conversation with Ilmar, whose excellent novel, Pobeda, 1946, came out last year, published by WSOY, and I'm very impressed. And we've had a short conversation on stage before about your book and several other occasions as well to talk about this excellent and heartbreaking story as well. Would you like to say a few words about the contents without not revealing too much to the audience?
Thank you, Sophie. It's so wonderful that you start with my book, even that you have many books, and you have written more, but we'll have time to talk about everything. Sophie is definitely one of my inspirations, one of the best writers in the world. Although I tried not to read other people's books because you don't want to get influenced when you write. And I guess I've been more influenced by films because most of my life I've been working with visual arts like film or television or theater. But the basis for everything is still literature. And sooner or later you understand that the story is the most important thing, even for a movie. Pobeda's story came to me also almost like an image first. I saw the beautiful Russian-made car, Soviet pride, Pobeda, but basically it's about a little boy who sees this wonderful car after World War II, when everything is gray and ugly and destroyed. And as always, children look for something beautiful, something nice, because even war cannot spoil childhood, because you're always curious, you're always wondering what is happening, what is the life all about. So he gets involved with the driver, who is a very charming man, and trusts the driver. He doesn't know yet what it cost him, because many problems start because of the driver and because of the car, which is sort of like the beauty of the devil. Not everything what is beautiful is always good, but of course we should always strive for beauty and aesthetics and wonderful images. So there is always the point of deception also. Like in your books, when you see something wonderful, you see a very nice man. The problem is that your sister sees the same thing. Yeah. Or you see something else, and it can be complicated.
It can be complicated, and especially when the history and political situation was as it was in Estonia. Now, in my novels, my purge is focusing on 40s and 1992, just when Estonia is regaining their independence, and then when the doves disappeared, is focusing on the double occupation, the Soviet occupation and the German occupation, and the shift between two powers and two occupations, and it's the main character is a very pleasant man, just like in your book, a very pleasant and nice man in a beautiful car who pretends to be a friend, yet of course we learn and the reader understands that the person is not a friend at all. In my book, When the Doves Disappeared, kun kyyhkyset katosivat in Finnish, the main character Edgar is working for a propaganda machine. And why I got interested in this character was that he was obviously a natural-born liar, because he had an image of life he wanted to have, but he didn't have. I saw a picture of him where he had airbrushed himself a bit more prettier, but also he had a lot of medals of honors in his chest. And, well, there were Medal of Honors from, well, Soviet Union, France, UK. So in a way, he had all the possible Medal of Honors, and it would be impossible combination to have those Medals of Honors in one chest. But he had this idea of having all these Medals of Honors, and they all came from flying. He was very much passionate about aviation. He wanted to be a pilot. He never became one, but he invented a story where he had been a pilot to Lenin himself. So, which gave him the possibility to tell this story. Those who had a personal contact with Lenin, I mean, they were privileged people. So in that way, that was a smart story. I listened the broadcast and his interview to Soviet Estonian radio, and it was very convincing. He was a very good storyteller. He had a very nice and pleasant voice. It was nice to listen to him. He was a good storyteller. Of course, this was quite a strange thing because he was quite simply too old to be the pilot for Lenin. So in that way, there was this everyone who could, put the dots together should understand that this is not the
something doesn't click.
Exactly. Yeah. But anyway, it was broadcasted, and he had better possibilities because he had been in personal contact with Lenin. But he also was very productive. Yes, and he also forged aviation and diaries and documents that actually on paper he looked like the true pilot, but there's no evidence that he had actually ever flew a plane himself. But anyway, this was something that actually got me interested in that person, because he was a creative person, that's for sure. And the real life Edgar also had a very difficult past, also because he had been working for Germans during the German occupation. Which, of course, and this is kind of interesting that and this was not unusual. Many others as well who had been working for German authorities during the German occupation, they ended up doing propaganda also for Soviet authorities. And this was especially interesting because, everybody who had anything to do with the German army, I mean, that was a death sentence. That meant that you were arrested, deported, So in that way, it seems like that Soviet authorities anyway found those who had a certain kind of talent for working for propaganda, and of course they had no choice because, if they had been working with the Germans, that would have meant that there's only one way to work with the Soviets and do the best they can, or then, say goodbye to your life simply, and also probably that might mean also difficulties to your family as well. So anyway, this is why I found this person. This was kind of my angle to this character when I understood how difficult his life must have been, all those destroyed wishes, and also I wanted to give a face to a person who has been working for Soviet authorities, because when I was a child, they were kind of faceless people. I knew that there were people who were listening to our phone conversation, people who read our letters, but in a way they were faceless, and I wanted to have a person who is, not just some faceless background to horrible events, but that is what I think is we need actually more. We need more faces to those who worked for the system. And that is why also I like your Pobeda book, because there is this bad man who is also a very pleasant man and knows how to talk to people. He is also part of the system.
Exactly. And what is interesting here, we get to the question of conformism. Because often these people, they manage to conform to one power, another power. It could have been the Third Reich, or it could have been the Stalinist Soviet Union. And obviously, with a certain talent, you can work in all systems. And the systems were coming and going, and the occupations were changing. So unfortunately, you have this feeling even in modern times, because you can still see a lot of conformism. People who change party lines and can easily go with one system or another system. And that's why it was important in your book that you showed the character, you made him believable. I even thought about Alberto Moravia and his book Il Conformista, which was made also in a wonderful film by Bertolucci. But that's a completely different case. This is something what happened in Italy during fascism. But in totalitarian system, you can always see certain similarity. And it's basically a concentration of power. Concentration of power in one hand. And even if you're a nice person, somebody else can misuse the power and somebody can get rid of you. And we saw it so many times happening also in Soviet history, when the ones who were basically putting everybody else in prison ended up as prisoners later themselves, because it was again a new regime, a new situation, and you can always misuse power.
And your life story is pretty remarkable, because you were born in Kirov to deported parents. Do you remember when you came to Soviet Estonia? What was the atmosphere around the people who were deported? I mean, what was it like to tell about your family story, for example? Or did you tell your family story?
Well, you always hide bits and pieces in everything you write, and I have written short stories about it and about my family. But basically, yes, being born in Siberia, you always think, was it really planned? Because it looks like an accident. But as a child, you think anyway that it's a wonderful experience. And even if you have bed bugs and lice and everything else what people had in these living conditions, even they were wonderful, because they were nice little insects, which is everything is wonderful for a child. And my first toy was also a little parrot, which was basically ended up in Siberia from China, because China was already then producing very colorful things. And now everything is produced in China, but at that time it was still quite unusual. So I remember the parrot from the Siberia time, which was the most colorful thing. Everything else was different shades of gray. And then later, arriving in Estonia, everything was taken away, of course, our houses and summer houses, and my grandfather's art school. So my grandmother, who was a doctor, a medical doctor. That's why she survived also Siberia quite well, because all the KGB majors and captains, they all had different sicknesses. And she had studied in St. Petersburg and Berlin and other places, and so she could cure syphilis and other things. But I can imagine were a big problem, because she was specialist in this area. So she managed to get a little veranda, glass veranda, like you could see, you know, the old houses which were built in Tsarist time. So we ended up, all of us, on this little glass veranda, and it was very cold in the middle of winter, so we had to constantly, there was like a little oven to heat it up, and the moment somebody fell asleep and nobody was doing it, it sort of dropped almost into zero degrees. So I had a lot of cold in my childhood. That's why I felt I had to go to Hollywood, you know, and get a little bit of sunshine, because I think I had the cold already in embryo. But you had also very colorful upbringing, still, because you had to shift between the two worlds. And in one way you were in Finland, in another way there was another world in Estonia. Did you go by the boat, the Georgot's boat, back and forth? Or
Oh yes, yeah. The boat trips were very... I remember actually when Georgot's, which some of you must remember as a ferry to Tallinn, was a new ship, and I remember how empty it was compared to the later years, because at the time there were not that many Finnish tourists.
People who got passports also and the stamps.
Yes. And at the time it was, of course, arranging the traveling to Estonia was all year round hassle and arrangement. My family comes from the western part of Estonia, so on the coast, which was a very military area at the time. Of course, it was the border of the whole Soviet Union, actually. So in that way, the border of the empire, and it was not possible to travel to countryside and not to my grandmother's place. So, and there was only one person who could actually make the official invitation. You needed the official invitation. There was the chance your grandparents or children or brothers and sisters could do the invitation. Only the next of kin was able to do that. So there were only a few relatives. My grandparents were not fluent in Russian, which meant that the Soviet bureaucracy was a little bit too complicated to them. So that meant that usually it was our aunt who did the official invitation. But it wasn't always accepted. Of course, we'll never knew what the reason was. Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. Of course, it involved quite a lot of bribing as well, and you need to bring a lot of all kind of sorts to militia and those somehow involved, and it also created, of course, a certain kind of uncertainty, because every time we left, we didn't even actually know if we ever had the chance to go back. So in that way, every time we left, it was like, this might be the
last trip, actually.
Last trip.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was also very complicated to go to the countryside because, people didn't have actually cars, private cars. And
no Pobedas even.
No Pobedas for
everybody.
No. That was only for certain kind of people who had the chance to get the beautiful Pobeda. And of course, nobody was using taxis. So how to get to the countryside from the city if you are supposed to be kind of visible? Especially you had to find someone who has a car, someone who is in a way reliable, and also is able then to take you to the countryside. But of course, in a way that I'm pretty sure that also KGB was totally aware that we were I'm pretty sure about that. But in a way that in a Soviet system, even though some things were forbidden, then in a way some things were, just let it pass.
Yeah, that's sort of interesting with surveillance, even with modern surveillance. Mm-hmm. When you think that in these times you had to open and re-glue the envelopes and send private eyes and spies to collect information. Now it's so easy, so automatic. Everything everything we do on our Facebook or Instagram, it's immediately in mega data system somewhere, and the only question is, yes, who has time to sort it all out? The same thing with foreigners and everything else in Soviet times. Much more information was collected than actually processed. So sometimes you were lucky, yes, that they didn't notice that you went out of town or you married a foreigner or something until they saw suddenly the paper or the application. So you think about it in every system. And I just visited, because of a book translation, one of the European Union countries, and there was a gentleman who is one of the heads of the customs, in the local customs, and I said, well, you know, it must be very difficult because constantly stopping the cars and checking the information. He said, no, it's all automized, it's all computers, it's the robots who check and see what we do. They have cameras, and the cameras will film all the cars which are coming and going, and obviously they notice, the automated systems notice when you go too many times over the border, or they see also, of course, your license. And then basically, as nobody has to check it, they get the printouts from their computers or report, this car has arrived, or this car is going too often to a certain place. Can you imagine if you forgot something on the other side of the border and you go 2 times and it's already becoming suspicious? So the situation is not as dangerous, but of course the surveillance is still an issue. And that's why it's good that you write about it and I write about it, because these are things we have to think about it and stay on top of it and notice.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the first Soviet occupation and then the deportations in Estonia, it was a shock to people because nobody was expecting, there was no, nobody could imagine that this could happen, that certainly, you know, someone, you know, in an eye blink could take you home and, you know, just send you to the camps or to death, and that seemed like a bit, you know, because before Estonia was just like Finland at the time, independent, young, democratic state, and when actually there was even though my older relatives, some of them had been visiting Finland before the Second World War, and they had said that Estonia was just like Finland at the time. But I didn't actually realize myself it before I was doing background research for my books, and I was reading old newspapers from the time and comparing them to Finnish newspapers at the time. And actually the language was the same, the news were published in the same way, and all the advertisements were the same. There were Nivea advertisements, just like in Finland at the time, just like in Estonia, and the urban culture was developing and so on. So in a way, and of course, during the Soviet years, I had no possibility of seeing that kind of, you know, images and papers, anything related to independent Estonia was banned, and it was locked down to special libraries where people had no public access. So in that way, that was a very interesting, and also all the old photographs of the time, they were really like, when I was thinking that actually about Finland, I have a lot of images from different decades, old Finnish movies, Suomi-filmit, all kind of this had already created my visual world of the Finland's past. But there, obviously, when I was watching, you know, and reading old newspapers, going through old photographs, and after regaining independence in Estonia, a lot of photo exhibitions about the pictures from the first Republic of Estonia. And that was like, then when I saw those pictures, I understood that how actually I had missed the visual world of the other side, because I had only seen the Soviet Estonia, and I didn't have in my head that vast box of different pictures. We don't even notice how much we actually collect visual material to our head and what we learn at school. But I mean, I didn't have that side at all from Estonia. So in that way, then that's when I understood actually how you can erase the history. You can actually erase the history, and Stalin was very well aware of the power of the movie and the living pictures. So in that way, he also understood that he had to remove also all the visual signs of the occupied countries. So it was not only about the words, but it was also removing the whole imagery of the republics of Estonia. And even though I was born in 1977, so before seeing those pictures, I hadn't actually understood that how much I had actually, how much images I had about Finland, but not about Estonia at the time. We just don't even think how much we just, take pictures.
And partially consciously, partially unconsciously, and of course the books were rewritten. And after World War II, certain books, they were just sort of basically blackened, some pages, that it was okay to read part of it, but not all of it. So, you couldn't reprint everything, the school books, the important laws and things, but at least, you could start editing it and changing it. And what you say, really, that you can delete a certain part of history or a certain part of memory, it's almost scary. Sofi has written so well about these hidden times, which is very important for us to remember, because we don't want to repeat the same history, and we want to learn something from history. I don't know if we can learn from history and past. Maybe we can learn something from the books, but it's an important thing. It makes us stronger and gives us strength, instead of trying, if there are still some people who would like to try to, sort of brush it under the carpet and say we don't have to talk about it. But it is our history, our living history, and very important one. So, so as it was for you, to rediscover what was the Estonia in 20s and 30s, I got quite much information from my grandmother, both grandmothers actually, because they survived. Both grandfathers died in Gulag, but they carried with them the knowledge, and even some friends of family had hidden some photographs, and there was a photograph of my grandmother dancing in Ingrid's wedding. And suddenly, this was something which was completely, it was impossible even to imagine in a Soviet time for a Soviet citizen that your grandmother has been in a royal wedding, and that they were actually royals, because in Soviet Union, we all know what happened to the Tsar and what happened to this class of people. So I was given this wrong information at home, and there were some pictures also of my grandfather when he was ambassador in France, and my grandmother, and they had taken a long car ride at that time to Nice, and they were under the palm trees. It's not only issue of climate, but it's basically different world, and the different world was very important for us to remember it also, that our grandmothers, grandfathers brought it and sort of crystallized it for us. And later, of course, we got similar images from Finnish television. I had a great aunt who actually didn't want to go out. She was mostly sitting at home and watching Finnish television. And she was watching Yle, and then she was watching Minos with all the advertising. And then somebody sent her from Sweden Damernas Värld, so she could read that also and look at these pictures. And she just thought, this looks better. This looks better. Why should I go out? Why should I go out and deal with the reality, the potholes in the pavement? I better just watch television.
Well, that's actually a very good survival method in a way, just to open the window to the world. And in your book BBC, which is listened in secret, is also another window to West and to the free world. And it seems like that now we have so many fake news, and in this new fake news world, we again need reliable news agencies and so on.
It's also, when you think about even the news, these days it's also very good to watch different news. Luckily we have television, so we can switch channels. When I'm traveling, I always try in the hotels, they have also different news in different countries. But in order to put the picture together, you really need to watch Yle, and then you need to watch CNN and RT and Al Jazeera and BBC and everything. And then you put your picture together, because there are so many different variations of news. That's the same thing again in your book, When the Doves Vanished, how you can change the news. The same thing, the same event, what happens, you know, what the people see and what is actually seen, you know, suddenly also it's not the Germans, it's the Soviet Russians. And sort of the change is sometimes very, very difficult for the human psyche.
Yeah. And speaking of the royalties, which were not a good thing, positive news in Soviet Union, then my book Norma, my postmodern version of Rapunzel, the fairy tale, Tähkäpää, in Finnish, because it's this fairy tale, Rapunzel, Tähkäpää, was my favorite fairy tale as a child. And I'm quite often asked how, you know, me as a you know, defender of women's rights and so on, how can I love a fairy tale about a passive princess in a tower? I mean, that doesn't sound like, you know, the one journalist said that you should like more Peppi Pitkätossu. More than Tähkäpää, but of course I went to Finnish library, sure, but I had a lot of Soviet Estonian children books. You know, I read a lot of them, and there are no princesses there. No, not at all. There are educative animal stories, or then stories about cosmonauts or things like that, and no princesses at all. So in that way, from that context, actually the fairy tale about a princess was much more actually rebellious even. It was something, in a way, from a different reality, and in the Soviet reality there were no princess stories to read about. So in that way I didn't see it in a way that I see it in a totally different way.
It's also interesting in your purge. You mentioned women's rights, and now of course we deal much more with it, but you have the very interesting, very strong female characters also in your latest book, but sort of it's something which probably hits certain chord, that you picture them in such a multi-dimensional way. The women who love, and then, you know, the love turns into almost violence, and it turns into lie, and how we can trust each other, and how can the women trust the men who manipulate them. Even in my book Pobeda, I show also how a woman is recruited as a spy in bed, and how you can sort of again manipulate a person and think, you know, what's the weakest moment, or what's when you are most vulnerable, and how to attack you then, or how to turn you around. What was really interesting, how you depicted it, was it somebody also who told you the stories, or it was from archives, or where did you got these female characters?
All my characters are like, you know, bits and pieces from different things. So putting up a character is like a puzzle, and then when I start to write, they start to have their own voice But there was also a story of one of our relatives where a young girl was taken to the questioning, and she did came back home the day after, and physically she was okay, but she never actually spoke since. So, in a way that, of course, I had heard this as a child, but I didn't actually think that what it actually, means, what had happened so that you don't speak anymore. I mean, she didn't lose her voice, but she just said, Yahya, Yahya, Yahya. And she didn't marry, and she lived her life with her old mother. And they could have taken the old mother. They were not interested in the old mother. They wanted a young girl, and she had been a very beautiful girl when I look at her old photos. But in a way, that's what happened, and that was the question I started to think later on. What could have happened? What makes you so silent? What makes you stop speaking?
Here also you showed very well how people become like commodities. You can take them and you can rape them and you can dispose them, and then there will be new ones and different ones. So you almost feel that sometimes you are nameless. I have few characters in my book. I didn't use names for them because I felt that it symbolizes more the situation where only state had name, and it wasn't really important always to know the person's name. It was a man and it was a woman and it was a child, that it wasn't really important if you are Estonian or if you are Georgian and where you're from, because you belong to the same empire.
Yeah, the happy family. And that's also when you think about, for example, Estonian, in Estonia, in mailboxes and the doors in buildings or homes. I mean, in Finland we have the name of the habitant on the door, but in Soviet Union you didn't. Or in the mailbox there was just a number and not the last name of the person who is living there. And this is kind of, part of the same thing, that actually you were numbers. Or like schools were not, the school number 53 or school number 99 or whatever, but in a way they were not named. Of course there were a lot of, suitable names like victory, friendship,
exactly.
There were like, very small, actually, number of suitable names. So I don't know, were the numbers also, just simply safe? Because you didn't have to think about, if it's proper or not.
Exactly. I studied in school number 22. It was called, in the First Republic, Westholm Gymnasium. Now it's again Westholm, but then it was number 22. So this was a little bit the feeling, yes, that you couldn't be different. You couldn't have hairstyle like you. You couldn't even have hair color like me, because I was also pointed out, what is this? You have red hair? I mean, this is not proper because everybody else has different color. Yeah. And I really felt bad about it, that, I'm different. Even if you think red should be the right color for the communist empire. I mean, what's bad about red color? But, in my case, it wasn't so popular. But then, of course, it was also psychologically. We felt that we shouldn't express too much. In your purge, it's quite wonderful how the two women have their secrets. And they don't express really, some characters never. We find out in the end of the book, when we read certain protocols, certain documents, the full truth. So that was sort of, a little bit, it became like a national character, that we have to be careful what we say, what you do. I was always told by my mother and father also, okay, now we talk at home these things. When you go to school, you don't say it, don't mention it to anybody. So there were so many secrets so many secrets, which was part of everyday life. And then it was a little bit schizophrenic situation where you had to deal with one reality and another reality. And also the fear, because fear was like an important part of everyday existence. And I think you looked at it very well in the book you did together with Imbi Paju about the fear and the different articles, and going deeper into how you can manipulate using fear.
Yes, the article collection Kaiken takana oli pelko was about the recent past of Estonia. A lot of different contributors wrote to the collection. We tried to get as many as, of course. I mean, you cannot have everything included, but trying to explore as many aspects of the occupation time as possible, and the consequences of the occupation, what it did to the nature, economy, psychology, and how it all, in a way, the title is everything in a nutshell that fear was. Literature is one way of trying to explain things to the others as well, open the windows, stories, movies, whether they are movies, plays, or novels, they are anyway open windows to the world.
What I noticed with the movies, there is music and there are actors and there is all the visuals, and people will probably get the film anyway. With the books, it's completely different. It's all only words, and the word has so much importance, what you do with the word. So, good luck. Well, thank you, Tukla Seura, and thank you, Viro Institute, and Virka Galleria, and our publishers, and Sofi, and
thank
who
you,
else?
Ilmar, and our wonderful audience.
Yes, exactly, that you came here.
And we have some books, and I'm sure Ilmar will also sign books for you if you want to have the fresh edition of Pobeda, and I will be there as well, and I read books.
Excellent. Let's do that.
Simply.
Yes. Thank you.